Start off with an intro. So just a little bit about our speaker today, Megan Red Shirtshaw. Megan is an educator, writer, and researcher who is super dedicated and passionate about Indigenous rights issues and college admission, and is actively working toward building greater Native presence in the media as well as in higher education. Megan believes in empowering young people to use their voices for the issues that they care about in their communities. Megan is also currently the director of Native Student Services at the University of South Dakota and is also currently pursuing her PhD in organizational leadership, policy, and development with a focus on higher education and a minor in American Indian Studies at the University of Minnesota. So with that, I'll pass it to Megan.
Awesome, Maddie. Thank you. Thanks so much to everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciate it. I am going to share some slides so that we can be in conversation with each other today. So give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, awesome. So hello everybody, and I totally pulled this poster from the internet, so I hope that this is correct and okay. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today, and just again, really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come and be a part of your space. I was just really excited to hear about the conversations sort of leading up to class and the things that you all are thinking about and reflecting on in our world and in the spaces that you're a part of. And so I'm really hopeful that we can do a little bit of presenting and then launch back into conversation, because I think that even just seeing the community that you've all built together in a virtual space is really powerful. So I just want to say thank you for allowing me to come in and talk to you a little bit about some of the things that I'm thinking about in my own work and research. So I want to say Pila Maya Nawopila, which means thank you and thank you. It's 2 different ways to say thank you in Lakota, to University of California, Santa Cruz, the ESLP program. Maddie and Kali have been very kind to me over the last week and giving me information about all the things that you're thinking about in your work. And so I just want to say a special thank you to the 2 of them and to all of the mentors, everybody that's doing this work. And then also to just generally to Indigenous communities. I think that some of the things that I'll be talking about today are really sort of focused on the sacrifices that Indigenous people have had, and feel that it's very apt and special that I get to be with you on Earth Day specifically. So I was really glad to see people sharing the things that they were doing today, which is really special. I think often in the sort of time that we're a part of, really sort of hard sometimes when we're focused on screens all the time to actually just look outside of our window and be in community with nature. And so it was really nice to hear from all of you, all of the things that you were doing. So again, thank you so much for letting me be here today. So I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. You guys have had a really powerful speaker series. I was looking at all of the people that came. Really special that you visited with Lakota Hardin. She actually and I are enrolled in the same community. So we're both Oglala Lakota, and Lakota knows my mom, and she knew my uncle very well. So I actually was at an event, and she was she was the person introducing me. And the minute she realized who my family was, she just gave this like really beautiful and personal introduction about my family. And I think for Native people, that kinship and community is so important in the ways that we really relate to each other through our family networks, through our tioshwes or extended family. So again, it sounds like you guys have had really fruitful and awesome conversations since starting this. So these are some of my identifiers. My preferred pronouns are she, her, hers. And I also consider myself to be a daughter. I'm a sister. I'm an aunt to nieces and nephews. And I'm also a partner to a person who is my best friend and really informs so much of the work and things that I do. I'm really lucky to have a very strong family unit And I think that that has been a big part of the reason why I've been able to do the work that I feel very passionately about and excited about. I'm also the director of Native Student Services at the University of South Dakota. This is me taking things into my own hands and hanging a banner without calling the university to hang it. This is a special banner for me because it sort of is central to my work. There's a very powerful organization in the state of South Dakota called Indian Collective, and they were doing a lot of the work centered around, you may have seen the protests at Mount Rushmore last summer where protesters were being arrested, and a lot of that work was sort of centered out of Indian Collective. This is their banner, Land Back. Land Back is a big movement for Native people and really challenging institutions and organizations to think about their relationship to land. It's definitely something that I'll talk about a little bit today. I'm also a doctoral student. I'm very passionate about higher education. I am excited by higher ed, but I'm also infuriated by higher ed in so many ways. Many of the things that you're experiencing on your campus, I'm trying to figure out on behalf of BIPOC students, and how do we decolonize and challenge the institutions to change in big ways. And I know that many of you are doing that through the LRDP conversations that you're having. How do we really build community as institutions? If that's really our mission in education, how do we build community and thinking about that? And I also saw a cat, somebody's cat wandering behind the screen. I'm a very passionate cat mom. I feel like cat people, we have special kinship to each other. So to the cat people that are on this call, I also have a cat that I'm very attached to. So I feel it's always important for us to honor our animal relations. They're also a part of this network. They're part of Earth Day. They've been here much longer than many of our even communities were here. And so I'm very passionate about animals and that relationship as well. So these are some of the important parts of my identity that I just wanted to share. So I am very grounded in understanding the things that are happening in our world right now, and really appreciated the acknowledgement of the murder of George Floyd. And I know that this has been a tremendously difficult week, especially for our relatives in the Black community. And I think that it's really important for all of you as students, especially, and considering myself to be a student and someone that works in student services, to acknowledge that we're grieving and that this is a very complex time. I think for so many of our communities as well, we feel that we have been in perpetual states of grief that have sort of altered and flowed and ebbed and flowed, and experiencing all of this during a global pandemic adds extra layers to that. And I know that for so many communities, the loss of life and the loss of agency and the ability to really feel like we can move about freely in our lives. So many of us feel like we already couldn't do that because of the systems that have persecuted us, and then coupled with the idea that we cannot be in community with one another, it's tremendously hard. And so I think it's important for me to take a moment just to say that I understand those levels of grief and the things that we're experiencing, and I stand in solidarity with you. So I always try to sort of center these conversations around this idea that it's okay. I often remind the students that I work with, like, it's okay to cry and it's okay to feel pain. And it's okay. I think a lot of us feel like we have to hold it together all the time. And I just want to remind all of you that it's okay to be sad. I recently hung a banner in my office that says, "You can cry here." I think crying is a very normal part of life. It's a healing practice. You're actually literally releasing toxins from your body. So I just want to create the space for all of you to remind you that it's okay. It's okay to have those kinds of releases. And I always welcome that, just as being in conversation. If you ever need somebody to just, who's totally a third party person out there in the world, just to talk to, I'm always open for that. So I just want to offer that space to you as well. So I loved the usage of the chat. I'm realizing that I can't even see the chat now, so I have to pull it out. But I want to say Happy Earth Day to all of you. And I feel so special to be a part of your community on this day. And so just asking all of you to share in the chat answers to the question, what is your relationship to land? So when you think about land, We'll just take a moment and have people share like what is your relationship to it. Oh, kittens are watching the lecture. That makes me happy. So awesome. So as you're thinking, something I'll share too is that the photos in this presentation are all taken by me on my iPhone, and they are actually, I used to live in the Black Hills, which is kind of considered to be the center of creation for Lakota people. It's where we believe that we came out of the earth. And so all of the photos that you see are from the Black Hills. So connection to land and to earth. Black Hills are in South Dakota. They're on the western side of the state. So people often affiliate it with Mount Rushmore, but it's so much more than that. It's one of the most beautiful places in the whole world. So if you ever get to come to South Dakota, there's so much more than what you see on the news. My relationship with land is to desperately try and stop fires from spreading across California. We don't own the earth owns us. It provides for me and my community, growing trees, food crops. Never seen land as something to be owned. Loving and grateful relationships, happiness and peace. Land has answers to questions we didn't know we had, a very special and sacred connection, meditation, beauty, healing, home, deep nostalgia and belonging, a reminder to give back to the earth. Land is our home, respect and restoration, provides for and grounds us. I love this. Something I appreciate greatly, but sometimes I take for granted. I appreciate that honesty. I see land as having its own energy and a connection between us. Respect and grateful, allowing for growth and enriching ecosystem, working perfectly as a whole. Earth and land operates. And it's saddening to see it warped by adverse human interventions. Yes, I agree. So keep sharing in the chat. I think that much like the opening of your class today, like really actually taking the time. One of the most important things that my mother actually said to me recently, she's from South Dakota, she was talking about a certain type of bird that we have in the state. And she was talking about how she knows that she's home when she hears that particular bird. And so for me, I've been trying really hard to like recenter myself in land as like the animal relationships we have, they're also connected to the land, right? They depend on it in a really different way than we do. So even taking a moment just to be like, is this the bird singing that my mom thinks of, right? Those are the little ways that we continue to be connected. And this idea of relationship, right, and reciprocity, a lot of you guys are talking about that in the chat, like, what is the earth teaching to me? What is the land teaching to me? But also what am I giving back in order to protect it? And so I'm hopeful we'll talk about that a little bit today. So thank you. Turtle doves, I like that sound too. That's a good one. So I wanted to share this, and this was something that Kali and Maddie had shared with me about a land acknowledgement, and think it's really, really important for us to remember that Native people, Indigenous people are present and current, and oftentimes I think institutions or organizations or conferences often put it as if we were in the past, right? Like they had a relationship to the land and now they no longer do. They no longer are part of it. Unfortunately, within historical narratives, so often like we are completely erased. It's almost like they don't exist anymore. So we're going to talk about their relationships to land as if it was something that previously existed. But land acknowledgements for a moment, right, at the beginning of any gathering are important to really center people in understanding that like before this institution was created, there were Indigenous people, and there were Indigenous people who had relationships to this space. So I wanted to share this as the UCSC land acknowledgement and to have you really start to think about, right, like what existed before this campus, who was here, how did they till, and they were the original environmentalists. So a lot of times we talk about environmental experts. Indigenous people are the original environmental experts. So really reminding ourselves of that. And I really like this idea of like restoring traditional stewardship practices on these lands and really healing from historical trauma. And I know this is something that many of you are really challenging in the LRDP conversation, right? Like, why aren't we talking to community members? Why aren't we bringing them into the conversation if they're really the people that are the experts in expanding our campus and building a better community, right? What does that look like? And really having climate change, if you truly have climate change as a priority, then why aren't Indigenous people, Indigenous communities at the table? So that's something really, really important to sort of think about and move forward with as well. I just wanted to highlight, and I imagine that many of you know this, that there is an entire resource on the UCSC website that tells you about what a land acknowledgement is. It tells you when and how you should use one. I was just totally blown away, and now I'm trying to write down all these notes about UCSC's like website so that I can try to apply these in my own space where I currently work. But just really, really want you to remember, right, that if you're thinking about hosting a program and you want to understand, have a stronger structure around land acknowledgements and the importance of them, this is on the website. This is a resource that's accessible to you. It can be added to professors' syllabi. So if you have professors and you want to challenge them to really think about this, you're in a sustainability course and they're not doing a land acknowledgement, right? Like, here are some resources that your school is providing to you to be able to actually add this into their syllabus. So I just wanted to highlight this. I thought it was really cool. I literally like spent all this time. I was sharing with Kali and Maddie that like I like trying to get to know the school from far away. So I really was looking at the resources available and just wanted to highlight that this is a very cool resource that you all have access to, that your institution is supporting. I hope for all of you in your academic and community work that at some point, no matter what you decide to do in your career, in your life, or in your roles, being a community member or a part of your family, that you read something or are given a piece of knowledge that totally blows you away. For me, in my work, in my research, in trying so hard to understand higher education, like what is the role of higher ed here in the country, in the world, for our students, for communities that have been marginalized, like what does all of this mean? For me, that piece of mind-blowing work was the Land Grab University report. And I don't know if any of you have seen this, but it was published by High Country News, and is a report that actually documents all of the expropriated land that was given to institutions of higher education through the Morrill Act. And the significance of this is that many of these institutions that are land grant, so this is a play on the idea of land grant universities, right? They were essentially being given Indigenous land for almost next to nothing. So rather than returning land back to Native people, institutions of higher education were taking it and profiting off it for very, very low cost. As many of you know, right, endowments depend on acquisition of land. And so these land grant institutions, they actually had early access to land that was taken away from Indigenous communities. So this report literally has documentation of all of those institutions and called out places saying, you need to look into this. You have to acknowledge that this is a really complicated part of your history. And so when I read this report, I was like, this is it. This is where the rubber meets the road, and where like Native people lost so much for the creation of higher education. And so I'll talk a little bit about why and where I started to sort of think about this in my own work. So this is a policy brief that I think Kali and Maddie sent out that I wrote, and it was sort of an extension of this idea of land grab universities. So I was asked by an undergraduate admissions community to develop a policy brief sort of focused on Native students specifically. And one of the things that I think was very complicated for me, and I hope we can reflect on together, is what is a land acknowledgement without land? So institutions can acknowledge this land is the ancestral or traditional homelands of this community of people, and yet not give them any agency or access, not allow them to teach their own students about these complex histories, not provide information about the plants that maybe are being studied in a lab that are traditional to medicines for those communities. So for me, I really started to sort of push forward this idea of like, okay, I felt really comfortable with a land acknowledgement, but now I feel very uncomfortable because what is a land acknowledgement without land? And what is Indigenous knowledge without land? So for so many of our communities, and I can really only speak to being a Lakota person, we have star knowledge that's very central to who we are. Our calendars run on the solstices. We are very connected to the medicinal plants that are in this region, the birds that I was talking about before. Directions are very considered to be very sacred and very important, the way that we face in particular directions, right? Everything that we believed about the earth and about people and about our relationships, right, had to do with land. So if we're giving a land acknowledgement, but we're not giving back the land and we're not allowing Native people to access that land, right? What is the point? What is the whole point? It's just empty words. So this idea of the creation of higher education, depending on access and acquisition of land. All of our institutions, endowments, came from this acquisition. And so I started to really sort of challenge myself to write this and think about what does that mean for Native students, especially for Indigenous students. So in this policy brief, I really challenged institutions to do one of two things. So either you can return the land back, give it back to us, or if you cannot return the land, which I think most of our institutions could return the land if they really wanted to, but if they really can't, you need to provide free higher education to Native students because you are occupying a space that is taking knowledge away from them. So in that acknowledgement, right, really understanding that this is systemic. American colleges and universities are morally obligated to acknowledge the educational needs of Indigenous peoples and to face their ongoing system of power that perpetuates the repression and erasure of Indigenous peoples and their knowledge systems. This is really what I'm trying to challenge higher education to think about. One of the really beautiful pieces of this is that I have not been successful in having colleges return land, still working on it, and I know you're all working on it too, but I have had universities use this policy brief as a foundation for presenting to their administration. So I have had a school recently in the Southwest that is actually moving forward with free tuition for Native students, and they use this policy brief as sort of the framework for that. So I'm really hopeful that this work will continue. There are many Native people that are doing this work and really pushing this idea of land-based reparations, right, for Indigenous nations. So I'm looking forward to sort of seeing how this conversation can move forward. The other side of this is that institutions have to acknowledge complex histories and they have to be able to rebuild from that. And I know in this class, I can already tell from the energy in this class that you are having those difficult conversations. But it's important for us to start to ask ourselves the question of, is the administration? If we as students and we as staff in diversity roles, right, are having these conversations, what are we doing to sort of push that narrative forward? And I know that you guys are really pushing this idea of sustainability and the ideas around divestment and how we care for the earth. These are just a few of the things that also additional things to what you're talking about that I thought were really interesting. You do have American Indian Resource Center, which is beautiful. You have a staff committed to doing this work. I saw this announcement that I thought was really interesting. And I don't know the sort of familiarity with NAGPRA, but repatriation to Native nations and what institutions need to return to Native people. There's a really powerful scene in Black Panther. I don't know if you remember it, where Michael B. Jordan is standing in the museum and he basically says something along the lines of like, you're wrong about this because this piece of history is literally like a part of my community. He says it way cooler than that. But I always think about that when I think about this return of items, right? Return of sacred items. And institutions ultimately, like, they have to be willing to have these conversations. So this was just one sort of example that I was thinking about alongside the things that Maddie and Kali were talking to me about. But these are all related to institutional priorities and responsible investing and what institutions really want to reflect, right? Rather than land acknowledgements, we want tangible action. We want you to actually support Indigenous communities, and we want you to actually put your money where your mouth is, right? In so many different ways. So again, this is a reflection from an outsider. I am not a student at UCSC, so I really want to be cognizant of that and honor that. But even in just sort of looking around virtually, understanding the way that higher education works, these are some of the things that I'm starting to think about in my own work as well. And if you are a Native student and you are in this class, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what your home nation is. And I think that, again, really challenging ourselves to remember. For me in my work daily, I'm very, very lucky at the University of South Dakota. There are 200 Native students on our campus. We are actually the largest, and I hate the word minority, the largest community on campus that is a non-white community. I don't know how else to say that, but Native people are the largest population, second largest population on campus. And I think that in my own work, I often am really being reflective of this idea of ancestral knowledge. Colonization has done a number on our communities. We've lost so much, we've gained so much in resilience, and there are so many beautiful things that have extended out of the things that we've lost, but I also know that our languages are disappearing quickly. And I know that our access to these spaces is disappearing quickly with fracking. I really appreciated the announcement about Line 3 for our communities that are in Minnesota, and really actually seeing a lot of the sort of live videos and the things that they're doing to really prevent this from happening. Pipeline responsibility. These things are destroying ancestral knowledge that we need to preserve and we need to protect. And the other side of this is really what profits have institutions made with that access. Again, endowments. And I think a really complicated conversation often around endowments is financial aid, right? Well, if we don't have this healthy endowment, then we can't provide financial aid for our students. There are universities that have divested completely from fossil fuel industry, and they still exist, and they still have healthy endowments, and they still are able to provide financial aid for their students. So why aren't we looking to them as examples, right? And truly, and I say this on behalf of all of you, you are the experts. I don't know what it's like to be an undergraduate during COVID-19. I have no idea. I cannot even imagine the things that you have experienced as a student. So for you, what power do words hold for students without action? The more that we talk about it, the more tiring it becomes without tangible results and tangible action as well. So just some things for you to think about as you move forward in your own work. Again, speaking as an outsider, it's really important to remember that the reason why the university has the resources that it has is because of purchasing land. And how do we effectively challenge institutions to invest responsibly and sustainably? You as students want your institution to reflect the things that you care about, and it can be extremely frustrating when they don't. So what are the ways that communication works at UCSC? What are the ways that you really feel like you actually are able to have critical and powerful conversations about these things? And I think that we keep talking about it and saying it out loud, but without responding critically and seriously to climate change, we will lose access to less. We're losing them daily. We have animals dying on the planet weekly, daily, that carry knowledge systems that we're no longer going to have access to. And so we're going to lose lessons if we don't start moving quickly. So rather than talking about it, right, what are we pushing forward in our own actions? And if institutions are acquiring that land, again, as I had mentioned before, we're using that endowment funding as an example, scholarships for Indigenous or BIPOC students. What are the things that we're actually responsibly investing that money into? So these are some things just to think about within your own community. The other side of this is that I want to be cognizant of the fact that you are students, and that is your number one priority. And doing all of these other things you are not paid for, you are not compensated for. I also really want to honor and acknowledge that. But as you move forward in your work, right, the things that you care about, how do we have these critical conversations? So, oh, this is not an updated slide. Ultimately, at the end of this, what work is pushing you forward in your climate, in your culture, and in your community? So really returning back to that initial question that I asked, right? Like, what is your relationship to land? And what makes you feel empowered to do the work? I know often that the conversation around self-care can be very hard, especially when you feel like you don't have the time or energy to do it in the first place. But it's also important for you to think about your own healing and what makes you feel empowered. And how do we ultimately heal as a collective, as humanity, in the wake of all of the things that are currently occurring? These are some of the things that I'm trying to figure out on a daily basis, working with Native students who feel tremendous responsibility to their nations and to keeping their nations alive. So for you in healing and thinking about being empowered, what are you doing to push your community forward? How do you define your community? Who is your community? These are some things that I just think are important for us to reflect on. So I wanted to make sure that I stayed. I think I'm within 2 minutes of the 30 minutes. So I just, one of the things that was shared is that you guys have had such great discussions and conversations that I really wanted to be a part of that and engage in that. And so I also wanted to offer myself as a connection or a resource. So if you're on Twitter or you like to send emails, I always love hearing from students and, just really want to hear about the things that you're doing. I'm super open to talk about anything we've talked about or anything else that you guys are just generally thinking about. So I just want to say thank you and maybe open it up for questions and conversation. So Pilame, thank you.
Wow. Wow. Just wow. Thank you so much. That was amazing. Yes. Snaps, applause. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, let's just hop into the Q&A. We can share our screen one more time just to, I think Collie's working on it. Yeah. No rush. Oh, sweet. Yeah, let's jump into the Q&A. Just some reminders, raise your hand. There's a raise hand feature that you can use if you want to like unmute yourself and say those questions out loud, or feel free to type your question in the chat and we can also bring that up. And if you want to do like an anonymous question, DM an ESLP organizer and we can get that out for you. Yeah, go off.
Alrighty. I don't mind starting off the questions. Sorry, could you hear me? Okay, lovely. Thank you. Yeah, how do you remain hopeful, honestly, when there's a lot of dire and really problematic and upsetting things happening? I mean, you mentioned like self-care, but yeah, like how you ground yourself. So
That's a really good question. I appreciate that. I think like one of the things that is really important for us, especially in our communities, to just sort of think about is, I know a lot of times many of us are sort of thinking about how we give back to community and we feel that community feels us, but I think really taking times for ourselves as individuals to just like slow down. sleep is actually a really big self-care thing for me. I know that often for you as students, you don't have enough of it. I'm a huge advocate for 8 to 10 hours a night. My partner will tell you that that is true. So for me, it's silly. It's a basic human necessity, but I have to sleep. I have to recharge. A lot of the things that I work with in students are really, all of us, we're complicated people. Humanity is complicated. And in order to be our best selves for the work that we do, like, we have to prioritize. And I think the thing too that's really important to remember is for each of you as individuals, like, you are going to do it differently than somebody else. Some people feel that exercise is very important to them. I dabble in that, but to me, sleep is the number one priority. Water, being outside, taking time to call people that I care for very much, my family. Someone just, thank you for the earring compliment. I collect earrings very avidly. That's a huge part of my passion. I could spend probably 4 hours looking at Indigenous made earrings online. I consider that to be self-care. My therapist also says that that's a form of self-care too. I also go to counseling, and I think that being able to seek out counseling that fits your needs, your identity-based needs, is tremendously important. We don't talk about it enough. We treat mental health as very stigmatized, which I don't appreciate. And so I think finding things that work for you as an individual person is really, really important. So those are the things that work for me and that are important, but really prioritizing and not feeling like you're feeling like society or other people are telling you that this is the way that it's supposed to be, or this is what you need to do. You need to do what's right for you in order to push it forward. So those are some of the ways that I try to practice self-care. If I'm not my best self, then I can't be good for my students, and my students are the most important people to me beyond my partner and family and my cat. So I have to try to be my best self. I have to try to reflect in that. So I appreciate that question. I can look in the chat too. I do see I see a hand raised from Colleen. So Colleen, I'll call on you and then I'll go to the chat too.
Hi, yeah, since we're just on the topic of self-care in general, which is very difficult in college on a quarter system. But I'm a political science student, and so I feel like, and I'm also focusing on trying to minor in environmental studies. And constantly the classes, it's just very discouraging hearing all of the pain going on in the world. But this class has kind of acted as a little bit of like a safe space or a forum just to reconnect to why I am here, and why I am in this major, because it all starts with community. And that was something that I wasn't really fully acknowledging before, but I just think that that's so important. It all starts from within the individual and then out onward into the rest of the world.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think that a lot of times it's always, and especially I think in a lot of our justice movements, right, it's always like, go, 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 and you've got to be with the people. And I think that if there's a really, I'm going to mess it up, but there's a really awesome quote by Audre Lorde about self-care. And it's like, I'll have to find it and put it in the chat, but she's ultimately saying like, I can't do the work if I don't take care of myself. Right. So I think that's something. I'll try to find the quote while I'm looking through the questions. Can you address water justice from a cultural and spiritual perspective? I love that. I recently moved across the state of South Dakota, and I'm actually closer to water sources now. So I'm trying to be really reflective of that. We did have access to waterways. I think that one of the things that I thought was really beautiful, I once saw a speaker talk about if they had traveled the United States, but actually used like the water to get where they needed to go. It was like the most tremendous sort of journey that they talked about. And I hadn't even really thought about that as like a mode of transportation. Now we just get in a car and go, you know, but this idea of like water as a central part of even our transportation methods, I just thought that was really beautiful. Water for us, many of you probably were witnesses to the Dakota Access Pipeline movement that happened in North Dakota. My partner is an enrolled member of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. And I think that the argument for water protectors is really this idea that our water is considered to be life. So you sort of saw that mini Wichoni, the idea of like water is life. We can't sustain water or living without access to clean water systems. And so, and that I think the hardest part of all of that too is that that sort of phrase doesn't even translate perfectly. It sounds a lot more beautiful in the language than it does in English. I think English messes things up in so many ways. But this idea that like water is so central to who we are and to how our systems work. That's why I really think it's important in these conversations to have Indigenous activists at the table. There are a lot of really powerful people that are doing this work to protect water systems and waterways. I have friends that are doing tremendous research on access to river. I know a graduate student who's doing something focused kind of on urban planning and how we access water as Indigenous people within urban settings, which I'm starting to be more reflective of too. So I think really, really for us, the short answer is just this idea that like water is the center of everything that we do. And if we don't care for it, then we'll lose life on the planet as we know it. We all know this, right? I'm preaching to the choir, but those are some of the things that I'm very reflective of in my own work. So I appreciate your question, Sonia. How has the pandemic affected your local Indigenous community, and how do you develop balancing activism in yourself? Oh, that's a really good, those are really good questions, Sean. Thank you. So I'm very lucky to be the daughter of a first language speaker. Lakota is my mom's first language, so her second language is English, which is why I said that English messes everything up, because one of the most heartbreaking things actually that my mom ever said to me was she was trying to translate something for me, and she's like, I actually can't like, and for those of you that speak multiple languages, like my mom was like, I can't translate. I don't know how to translate it for you in English. And so I share that because I think that one of the saddest and hardest things that the pandemic has done to impact the tribal communities in South Dakota is death of first language speakers. It has rocked our communities. Navajo Nation, I imagine that many of you saw in the news that Navajo Nation lost hundreds of people. South Dakota and the tribal nations, I think that we've lost something like, I don't want to get the statistic wrong, but I think we've lost like 15 to 20 first language speakers in the state, which to us is dire. That is an emergency situation for us. One of the things that I think is really, and Lakota, knows this too, is that we weren't written languages. So our developing orthography, right, for any of you that pursue linguistics, is very complicated. Everybody learned the language by speaking the language, not by learning it from a textbook, right? All of those first language speakers, culture and language are intrinsically tied to each other. They cannot be dismantled from each other, which is where land comes into that as well. So for us in COVID, the loss of first language speakers and our community members has been devastating, and I've seen it impact students directly. And the second question, I think, developing a balance between activism and myself. I don't know how other people in this kind of community feel. The word activism feels so uncomfortable to me because I'm living my life. It's just a part of who I am, right? And I think for so many of us, it's just central to our identities, and so we don't see it we don't see it as this other thing that's outside of like who we are or how we operate in the world. And so it's such a good question, but I think that for me, it's like I can't take off being a Lakota person. I can't take off being a Lakota wian or woman. My pronouns, right? So I think for me, it's like this constant balance of going back to the first question of like self-care. How do I honor those things about myself while also understanding that like the minute I walk outside my door in the morning, like I'm doing the work. It's like a part of who I am. So I hope that for some of you, you're also like trying to figure those things out about yourself, that it doesn't have to be this separation as long as you're willing to take the time to care for yourself. It's okay to feel like that's just part of who you are. So I appreciate that question. Going back to Haley's question, I carry around business cards of Native artists whose earrings I have on, and I lost these. So I'm really sorry. I normally really try to honor artists, especially artists that are on this call, small businesses. So I wear these earrings and I love them, but I'm really sorry that I don't have the artist. So I'm going to try to figure it out. Getting things that make you happy is a good thing. That's true. I'm a teacher for an outdoor education program, and I want to start this dialogue with the kiddos, but some of them are really young. Any advice on how to get that ball rolling? That's a really great question, Lexi. Thank you. There are some really, there's a really great actually website called, I can remember the name, but if you Google Debbie Reese, she is a very well-known Pueblo scholar who actually has a website focused on Indigenous children's literature. So for any of you that are looking for access to books, I think that's a really great way to start with young people, is to show them a book. There's a Caldecott winning book that came out this year. I think it's called We Are Water Protectors. And it actually talks about land and relationship to land for young people. So book, I think access to books. And I can also send these resources to Maddie or Kali, and they can pass them on to you as well. I'll find the website. But I think reading and engaging young people, my heart is starting to break at like, now we're so dependent on, media, that when I was little, I like was at the library all the time. I was like, I'm gonna read my book or bring my physical book home. So I always promote reading, but I would look at We Are Water Protectors is a book that just came out that talks about connection. So that's one way to start.
Thank you.
Book recommendations from Sydney. Yes, I promise. I promise I won't buy an alligator. Book recommendations. I always recommend my mother is an author. She's written 3 books, and I always recommend hers. Her name is Delphine Redshirt, and she grew up in Porcupine, South Dakota, on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and wrote a book about it's her memoir, and then my grandmother's life, and then she recently wrote a book about a really important community member from my community named George Sword, who was a tribal police officer and was expected to police people on the use of the culture and the language, but he was actually keeping records of, so he was so awesome. He was like behind the scenes preserving all of this stuff that he was supposed to be preventing people from practicing. So she's been translating a lot of the things that he protected. And so that was her 3rd book as well. So I always recommend her. And again, I can send this information too, so that it can be forwarded on as well. Another that's very important to my partner and I is There by Tommy Orange. If you haven't read that book, it's very much in the national conversation, and it's about growing up as an urban Native person in Oakland, which isn't that far away from you at UC Santa Cruz, closer than I am in South Dakota. But if you haven't, Tommy Orange is just one of the nicest people that I've ever met. And he totally, I think, is just a person who had no idea that his book or his literature was going to blow up in the way that it did. And it's a tremendous piece. So I would encourage you to read There if you haven't read it yet. Let's see. After seeing UC's response to COLA protests, I struggle to think of how we as students can change our institution for the better. How can we change from the inside out? I don't know. I mean, I would really love to hear, I don't want to just be the person that's talking at you this whole time. Like, I would love to hear from you or from others to Robert's question, like about your institution, like what are the things that you find frustrating or like, how are those conversations going? I would love to hear from others about that, since I'm an outsider looking in.
Sorry, I am the comment like right after his question. And like my take on it mostly is that the UC administration, like the really, really high up, like the president and all that jazz, those people are really the root of the problem, because if you look at their paychecks, they're huge. If you look at the amount of money they spend on like themselves, it's a massive amount of money. And they somehow can't figure out how to pay the graduate students who like do a decent amount of the work. And like honestly, most of the work for these courses and like even the undergrads, like the people who are running this course, I don't even know how much you guys are getting paid, if paid at all, for this kind of organization. Like, I don't know if you guys are allowed to talk about that, but like, this is what I'm talking about, you know, like the administration spends millions and millions of dollars on themselves, and they don't spend any money on the students who actually do the actual teaching that they're talking about. And it's mostly because, like, you know, you see, since a corporation, they can't really, or not that they can't, but they don't want to change, and they don't want to like stop spending money on themselves or cut like small amounts of their paycheck for other people to survive and like be able to do things. And like UCSC is a really particular spot because housing here is bonkers expensive. It's like the most expensive in the country. So like our grad students have a particular need, and it's just never met. That's my take, but I'll leave space.
Yeah, I think adding to that and commenting on the how can we change from the inside out part, how I always like remain hopeful while still participating in the UC system is that there are spaces like this, and there are ways to get involved with organizing, like with your peers. And so I've really, like, within the past year, seeing how COLA went down and how just repeatedly administration does not like value student agency and like give credit to student voices, I've really tried to do the work to like throw myself into spaces where I can learn from my peers. Like this is a space we're learning from each other. Like this isn't even us as ESLP teaching you all. Like there's no teaching here. It's just sharing and spreading like different knowledges, because we all have different backgrounds and we all have different experiences. So that's where I find like at least hope, like while still participating in like such a capitalistic like institution. It's so frustrating. Definitely revolving myself around peers that like care just like we all do here. That's what's been like really great and encouraging as far as trying to change from the inside.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like on that, Callie, I was gonna say I do like how we have spaces like this on campus, but I was also gonna say like I know that with COLA, I'm pretty sure, like, I could totally be wrong on this, that there was one grad student still that, like, wasn't rehired. But COLA, like, was a way to get the university to listen. You know, I mean, it got, like, national attention at some point. And so I think when it is good opportunities, like, within the university to gather as students, I think it's just kind of identifying those, like, key issues. Like COLA, I mean, grad students, that's a collective like group right there that can't even like afford to live here, you know? And so I think it really just is about like organizing together, and like being on Zoom does make that a lot harder, as I'm sure everyone has noticed. But yeah, I think that once we are back like on campus, there are a lot of like times that you get to kind of interact with people, even just like in discussions, passing, like I just feel like that community is a little stronger in person.
Anyone else? This is your space. There's a question from Haley. Do you believe we are too far past the point of repairing the system? That is a good question. I wish I had like a whole other hour to like talk about that. You know, I think that you know, I don't know. I think about my and I know for so many of us, this is something that we reflect on too. Like I think about my relatives. Like I have a painting on my wall of my great grandfather, who's 3 generations removed from me, and he did a lot of work in education, and he believed that I was coming. and it makes me emotional to even like talk about it, right? Like he believed that there were going to be generations that lived after him. And so I have to try to carry that on. And so even in the times when it's like really hard to, and I know that so many of us, right, in our work, we feel that heavy burden. I have to be reminded that he believed that we would live on, we would continue on. And my students believe that too. I'm not to be possessive, but the students that I am privileged to work with on a daily basis, they believe that we can live on and that we can continue to exist. And so I have to, that is my, I believe part of my role here on this earth is to just try to promote that, like, we've survived so much and been resilient people in so many of our communities. And so I operate on the glass half full, because there are people that came before me who did too, despite things that they experienced that were tremendously hard. So I think repairing the, I want to be reflective and think about all of the different ways that we dismantle or repair or rebuild. And I think that it's going to take me a long time to try to figure out like what we need to do. And yet also like how we burn it all down and start over. So it's a really good question. I wish I had more time. But I have to be hopeful, the word that was used earlier, because I had people before me that believed I was coming. And I want to honor that in the work that I do. And I see, and I know that I'm coming like up on time too. But the question from Kyle about, land back and Native education idea getting further adoption at other colleges. What do you say to help people share your perspective? I really appreciate that. And I think that, I just want there to be rich conversation about what we do in order to create systems of higher education that support people that want to go and that want to be a part of them. For so many of us, there are ways in which we feel that we are undervalued within the system. You all were sharing that, right? Doing work and not getting acknowledgement, or doing work and not getting compensated for the work that you're doing. And there are also communities of people that cannot even dream that college would ever be a possibility for them. Like, do not believe in any space in their mind that they could ever even take the initial steps to be a part of the American higher education system, because they've been persecuted in other countries and can't even get into this one in a fair way, because they have been pushed down by the system. They've not been given equitable opportunities in their classrooms as students. And so I think that, really sort of thinking about like this idea that I'm sort of trying to push forward in Native higher education, and also like how do we across our communities come together and start to challenge higher education to be better. The reason why higher education was created in this country was to provide opportunity for people, but only a very particular group of people. White, hetero, cisgendered men. And that is not reflective of who we are now. That is not who this country is. It wasn't who this country was before it was colonized. So how do we really challenge like institutions to say like, you can change. You can change these policies. You can divest. You can invest sustainably. You can make different choices moving forward. And so that's really my hope for the work that I'm doing, but also for the work that all of you care about very much. The Naomi Klein event tomorrow sounds amazing. I met her when I was a graduate student, and I did not know that I was meeting her. I was invited to a program and it was like 12 people in Naomi Klein, and I was like, what is going on? This is so crazy. I know that was my Indigenous like privilege that was happening. You are Indigenous and there's Earth and you will talk. So I was very lucky in that space. But I'm really excited for all of you and for the conversations that you have about organizational change and policy and how we do this work to support each other together. So I'm always open to conversation if you have communities that you think might be interested in this work, I'm always open for dialogue too. I think I'm coming up on my time, right? I don't want to take away from your like space. I know that I'm a guest, so.
Yeah, if you want to, I mean, we could just offer thanks like for coming and for answering all these questions like in such an amazing way. But yeah, if anybody has any last questions, we have like 2 more minutes allotted to this section. But yeah, thank you so much. That was incredible.
I just again like you know, you're all doing such important work, and I know how hard it is to feel like you're not being acknowledged or compensated for the work that you do, and I just really want to honor that and say that like I appreciate you and I stand in solidarity with you, and I know that this is a tremendously hard time to be trying to push this work forward, but if there's ever anything that I, as a totally third-party person across the country, can do for you, I will drop my email in the chat, and you are welcome just to shoot a message if you're thinking about anything else. And I just also want to say that this is such a special space. Like the minute I came in here tonight, it's really hard to feel that in Zoom rooms. Sometimes I go into Zoom rooms that are so awkward, right? And I felt the fam here. So I just want to say that I was born in Walnut Creek. I was born in the Bay Area, and I love California, and I just love all of you. And I wish I could come to this class like every week, because yeah, I can feel the love in here. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for letting me be a part of it tonight.
Wow, thank you so much. The love is felt, the love is received and given. I also just wanted to say too, as an ESLP organizer who's very interested in this work, if there's ever petitions, funds, or anything that is needed with like activity that are going on in Minnesota, like please don't hesitate to reach out to us if like more word is like needed to be spread. So just know, you always have an ally in Santa Cruz as well. So thank you so much for being here.
Appreciate that. Thanks everyone. Have a good evening.